This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by OneSkin. Led by Ph.D. scientists dedicated to helping people age in a healthy, vibrant way, OneSkin patented the first protein building block scientifically proven to reverse skin aging at the molecular level. Listeners of When Science Speaks receive a special 15% discount off an entire OneSkin order, any products, no minimum purchase. If you haven't yet experienced OneSkin products and decide to subscribe, you'll get a first-time subscriber discount plus an additional 15% off your subscription with the special Science15 code for When Science Speaks listeners. Just go to oneskin.co and use the promo code SCIENCE, that's the word science with the number 15 next to it, at checkout. And we'll also have a link in the show notes to the Science15 promo code. It is so great to have Ricky Patel on the show. Ricky is the founder and CEO of Point Science Analytics, which is a newly formed startup breaking down biotechs for investors and consultants in bullet point format, all Ph.D. backed. Holding a Ph.D. in clinical neuroscience from King's College London, Ricky is a highly skilled molecular neuroscientist and worked on ALS and dementia during his time in academia. Leaving academia occurred due to major life events and the opening of the Pandora's box of mental health, unpacking childhood traumas, and how the hurt inner child dictated terms for 2 decades. A new fulfilling sense of purpose has been found by Ricky as he embarks on the journey of entrepreneurship with the understanding that he was not born to fit in, but in fact born to stand out. I love that. Ricky, thank you so much for being on the show. You've got many things going on, initiatives, different projects, startups, all great stuff, your newsletter. And thank you for setting aside time in that schedule to join us in When Science Speaks today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Mark. It's an absolute pleasure indeed.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, Ricky, is because you are, in fact, one of those what I call rare purple unicorns. You're a talented scientist and a strong communicator. You can distill complex information and make it really come alive for general audiences. And most people, myself included, are skilled in one or the other, math, science, or verbal, but not both. And after more than 200 interviews of the show, my hypothesis, based on what I've learned since launching When Science Speaks about 5 years ago, is that these purple unicorns have one of 2 common qualities or both. They are either first in their family to go to college and or bilingual. And we had a chance to talk offline. It turns out you have both of these qualities, which in my eyes suggests you're really strong in both areas. Can you share how you think factors, being first in your family to go to college and also your bilingual quality, can you share how you think these factors may have contributed to your keen communication abilities, or rebut my hypothesis, whichever you choose?
Yeah, it's a really deep question because it strikes the correct nerve with me, I think is the best way of putting it. And I'll start with the first aspect of that, because being the first in the family to go to college, I've got an elder brother who has as well been to university. It means that the education level or the knowledge base and the words I am taught at uni and the words I seek out already go over what family or my mother could understand. And so it was already a case of, okay, how can I distill a lot of knowledge into a simplistic format for somebody who basically finished school, didn't have this higher education? And then when you include the bilingual nature, so I speak Gujarati as well at home, that was a case of, I've noticed explaining neuroscience principles to my mom, explaining how motor neurons work, and I'd be switching between English and Gujarati, and it would happen so readily and so easily. It was second nature, quite literally. And I'm a firm believer, based on your hypothesis as well, which I do back, that these contributing attributes have made me an effective speaker in conveying complex information, but distilling and breaking it down so it can be digested by the individual listening to it also.
And another thing that's implicit in that too, I think, Ricky, is when it's your mom, when it's an authority figure, when you're living at home and your parents want to know, what are you studying? There's the challenge of distillation and translation, as you mentioned. And also, it has to be clear and simple, but not feel patronizing, for example.
Yeah, this is another key factor is that communicate high complexities of knowledge or processes in a non-patronizing way is actually quite a skill in itself. And having been in academia and had many academics preach to me quite literally in a patronizing manner during lab meetings or department presentations or seminars, you name it, you tend to pick up how not to do things. And that is the greatest skill one can, I believe, obtain, which is how not to do something purely because of experience of how it happened to you. So now when I explain to either my mum or non-academic friends, neuroscience principles of what I worked on, what I did my PhD on, and what I'm doing now, it's in that way of, wait a minute, it was explained to me like this, like a bombardment, like machine gun fire of technical information, which actually just makes you feel not enough and breeds that academic imposter syndrome, when actually it should be on me and the accountability should be on me to be able to convert this complex information into something simple, which then that individual understands. If I've done that, then I'm the individual who knows how complex it is, and I fully understood the inner depths and sanctums of it, which I think is super important.
Yes, that point you made, particularly at the end about really understanding it so well to be able to translate it in that way. Thank you for that. We had a chance to talk offline, and not everybody is first in their family who went to college. Not everybody is bilingual, but many scientists want to strengthen communication skills, particularly when it comes to talking to their most important stakeholders. And you told a story that I thought listeners would really enjoy. And as you described it, it was a specific story in how, although it was quite uncomfortable and difficult at the time, it ultimately crystallized for you what would help take your communication skills to the next level. And it's something that listeners could do, even if they don't meet the first two factors or have those variables in their profiles, as we just discussed. Would you share that story with listeners, Ricky?
Yeah. So if this ever had a title, it would be Become Comfortable in Uncomfortable Situations. And this was Thursday or Friday evening. I'm at my lab bench, as you are, 5, 6 p.m., finishing off an experiment, and a colleague runs towards me. And it's a fellow PhD student. And they just say to me, Ricky, we've got a presenter coming in tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., to assist with academics and how to present. Any chance you could put some slides together of your PhD? And so I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, okay, it's about 5, 6 p.m. I've still got another hour and a half of this experiment to finish. I could slap together. All of this is working around in my mind. And I'm feeling the stress is increasing, the levels of stress, because I don't want to let this person down. At the same time, I need to look out for myself. And you're weighing up this multitude of reasons and rationalizing with it. And I just turned around, looked at them and went, yeah, fine, not a problem. And they looked at me in bemusement because they were expecting it. I think they were expecting it though, like 5, 6 p.m. in the evening, the day before when it's due, 10 p.m. in front of the entire department. It is a tough ask. But that evening, I slapped together some slides that I had from lab meetings, put my own spin on it, did a summary slide, and then presented it the very next morning. And I always remember that I am the expert of my thesis worldwide. And this was even during my PhD viva when I had 2 experts in the field. That this situation, although right now is very uncomfortable, there will be great growth that comes out of it. And that fundamental was so key for me to understand. And as I went through the rest of my PhD at the time and the very short postdoc, and in particular now entrepreneurship, it was seeking out or sticking my hand up what these situations were that made me feel even a little bit uncomfortable, because I know that at the end of that, there will be growth, and in growth becomes comfort. So then what happens is I'm always growing, but I'm also always becoming comfortable. And so I need to seek these subtly uncomfortable situations.
Just wonderful. That is just such a vivid way of describing it and something that listeners can implement. And there's another exercise, I guess you would call it, that you described when we talked. I was just thinking about it as you were finishing your response there on presentation roulette. I may be getting the exact description wrong, but this is something that fits very much into this discomfort growth virtuous cycle. I guess it's comfort, discomfort, comfort again, and always looking for this incremental discomfort to improve or to enhance growth. This presentation roulette, could you describe that for our listeners? Again, another thing they could implement right away to start to propel their communication skills forward.
Yeah, this is a way of staying in a safe environment with your fellow PhDs within your department or moving to different departments, but also knowing that there's growth at the end of it. And this is an instance of you could start within whether you're a department of immunology or mine was the clinical neuroscience department. Get together 5, 6 PhDs, write your thesis title on there. Each PhD has their essentially one of their lab meeting talks ready. And the names go into a hat and you select a different name. And whoever's name you pick out, present a lab meeting presentation of their data or their 3-minute thesis, whatever it may be. If you're in the Department of Neuroscience or Clinical Neuroscience, as I was, this is okay because you generally know what everybody's working on. You're in that field. However, it escalates if you mix the Department of Physics and Astrophysics together, Department of Engineering, because if you suddenly pick out somebody's PhD thesis on theoretical physics, you really do have to think on the spot and see what's on the slide, scan, look at the audience, what's the response, and you're getting all its feedback. So you're using all the sensory information. And in those instances, it is so uncomfortable, but by the end, you realize how much you've grown because you think of questions, you think of responses, you think of ways to delay a response in order to allow yourself time to think when someone asks you a complex question. And even just a couple of seconds can help with clarity of thought in articulating a response and communicating effectively. So it's a great task and it's a wonderful way of doing it in a really safe way with your fellow PhDs around you because you're all growing together.
And as you mentioned, that pause, instead of trying to fill it with a filler word, an or like or something like that, that pause also has the added benefit of drama to an extent. It gives you a chance to think. It's not distracting because it's not filled with a word, a filler word we typically use. And it also allows for, it gives you time to think, and it also adds maybe just a little bit of gravitas or weight to your comments, indicating like I'm spending the time to think about this. Such a great tool and idea. And I hope that it's helpful for listeners as they try to figure out mechanisms for improving their own science communication skills. Ricky, we're going to talk about Point Science Analytics, your newest venture, and really excited to do that. Before we get to that, on your LinkedIn profile, you've described challenges that you faced and overcame during your academic journey, and also how these obstacles fueled your entrepreneurial energy, leading you to found your company, leading you to found Point Science Analytics, and leading you to achieve in a whole range of ways. Would you share these experiences if you feel comfortable?
So I speak very openly as on LinkedIn about my mental health, well-being, the founder journey, especially as a PhD in the transition. And for me, it was what is my true purpose and my fulfillment and curiosity. Challenges I faced have been childhood traumas, which has been racial abuse as a child, as a family, father passing away when I was 9. So all of these things compounded before I was even 10 years old. And as we come to know, these are key developmental time in one's life. And so I went on the quest to achieve because I had this traumatic energy, I would say, built up, but I never had an outlet or an understanding as to why I feel this way or why my emotions are like this. So what I did was put it in a box, put the box in the deepest part of my mind and then forget about it there or drop it down the well. And as I went through life, I constantly wanted to be better because I had a point to prove to the world. I was the child with different color skin. And in this world, if you're different is bad. And I'm different. Oh, okay. So I'm bad. So it's a need to be heard, but also a case of not having a father while growing up and seeing all the other fathers at parents' evening, at sports events, things like that. It all compounded. And I played sport at a high level and then did my undergraduate degree. And I was like, okay, this is good. Baseline knowledge. Climbed Mount Kilimanjaro after my undergrad, did a master's degree, second degree black belt. So you see, all of these achievements are lining up, but that's because the fuel of the pain, I didn't just spray out and set everything on fire. I actually channel in a positive way. And that was quite key in me achieving, but it came at a great cost because when you leave Pandora's box of one's mind sealed for 2 decades, my cost was my mind, quite literally. And I discovered words would send me back to childhood and I remember everything and my father's funeral and things like this. And at the same time, I began to have mild separations with reality while walking because as the stress compounded, pandemic, I got into the final year of my PhD during the first lockdown. My mother had health issues. There was that worry. I was trying to do everything on my own. The PhD stipend was not very good. As we know, the finances in the PhD world aren't great. And so things mount up, but there was always this unrelenting belief in myself that if I just chip away at it, started week by week, and then the weeks became too long to go, okay, let me break this down even more. Let's go day by day. Okay, cool. So I get up in the morning, I do whatever I need to do during the day, write my thesis, analyze data, check in on people. Okay, it's end of the day. Okay, I sleep. And then eventually sleep started to elude me. So it became 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning where there was no sleep and I'm staring at the ceiling. I need to readjust. What I'm doing is clearly wrong. So it became a thing where I would come back from the lab at 10 p.m., watch Netflix till midnight, make a coffee, and then start writing my thesis midnight till 3 a.m. and go to bed at 3:30. That period where I would stay awake, staring at the sea, I transformed into something that I can be productive in. And instead I slept from 4 p.m. and woke up at 10:30 a.m., which proved to be more productive and continued that way. Now, where this all compounds together is I was sitting on the confocal microscope and I said, do I love what I do? No. What am I doing? I'm not really sure. What's my purpose? Absolutely no idea. And after a decade in academia, from undergrad all the way through the end of PhD, that's a big realization to be hit with while you're taking images of these neurons and trying to cure the world, which is why we go into science. And so life events occurred, and I really began to look at myself inwards as opposed to projecting outwards and wanting approval from the world and for people. I began to look inwards at myself, and the journey began of moved back home, took time off, began applying for jobs, and I saw the same problem come about and then just went for it. It was actually during an interview where the managing director said to me, Ricky, I heard you had this idea for a company because I presented it as an interview task for the service. He goes, I would do it. Go away and do it. Otherwise, it will gnaw away at you for the rest of your life, at the back of your mind. And at the end of the email, he wrote, you're destined for great things. And I was not in a good space mentally. And I was reading this on my phone and I just started to cry. I was like, I have to at least try. And so all that energy ended up being turned into trying to be a founder. Now it's important that everybody understands. I did not know what B2B was, B2C, SaaS. In my world, are gene interactions or protein interaction. And it was through studying creators on LinkedIn, reading the right information, asking for help, that I managed to understand more about business, investors, what's pre-seed, what's a seed round, why do I need tech, do I not need tech, what are the different consultants around. And through that journey of discovery, or I'd say self-discovery and self-reflection, I realized actually my real and true potential is this founder's journey of entrepreneurship, of point science analytics. And quite literally, it saved me. It's so stressful, as you'll know, Mark. It's long hours, it's painful, and I'm in the early stages. I've been going for 8 or 9 months. But now I'm at the stage of the deck is ready to go for pre-seed raise. I'm building those strong relationships. People know who I am on LinkedIn. It's moving forward. I'm seeing traction. And in a world where we exchange our time for money, it's difficult to see that traction when the money isn't coming in. But I realized to myself, and I understood rather, investing my time, and the investment literally takes time for the returns to come back. And so these experiences, obstacles, pain points, traumas were not easy, but I speak of them openly and in the Sunday Reflection newsletter I write because it may just help that one person. And in fact, it did. On numerous occasions, I get messages from around the world from people that have said to me, I posted on the day would have been my father's birthday, December last year, and woke up to a message the next day from someone saying, "Hi, Ricky, I'm doing my PhD in South Africa, and I was 9 years old when one of my parents passed away." The exact opposite me was out there and that read it. They said to me, "Thanks for writing that," and giving me that hope to keep cracking on as well. And that's just so impactful. So when I see that little impression logo on some of my posts, and it may say 50 or 100 or 200, and you think, oh, this has crashed, or like 500. What if that was a room full of people and there were 100 people in there and they all looked at me and said, I looked at your post? That's a big thing. In the days of social media where we evaluate success with metrics like likes and interactions, actually it just has to be someone in the room. So how I view obstacles is that I think the answer previously dictated it was get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like life's full of uncomfortable events with small pockets of comfort. And if you can truly become comfortable in the discomfort, then you'll just see great growth, which will align with your potential, your purpose, your why. And then you'll sleep better at night, and you cannot put a price on that.
Thanks for the courage to share that, Ricky, and for all you do in just that one dimension. As you point out, many people are dealing with a lot of challenges which they're unable to express. And you're sharing this information through the newsletter. And we'll have a link to that, of course, in the show notes so others can subscribe. You are having a positive impact. So thank you very much for that. I know that listeners will appreciate it as well. And it's a segue, of course, into your company, into Point Science Analytics. So tell us all about it. Tell us what you're working on now with the company, your vision, and what you're hoping for in the future.
Yeah. So Point Science Analytics breaks down biotechs in bullet point format. And this is for the investors, consultants, the life science world. I just saw a glaring problem, and it was in that story I've just told about the interview. And that's when it hit me. It's like, this is something monetizable. And so the problem was, if I have 4, 5, 6 clients that want these reports, I'm going to be working an 80 or 90-hour week again. Having done that in my PhD, I don't really want to go back there. I think many would empathize with me on that. And the next task hit me was, how can I make this scalable? And we live in this AI world, right? It's overrunning everything with OpenAI, GPT 3 and 4, Google coming out with theirs as well. There's just many that are going to be constantly moving around. And so I began to think of the AI machine learning world and immerse myself in that. Now, as a molecular neuroscientist, I was already really interested by it, but I'm not that sort of technical founder. I can't code. So what was very useful was a lot of these startup or accelerator programs which are out there, and one of which was the Microsoft for Startups program. And so I applied for that for Point Science Analytics because I wanted to generate some form of architecture to build the tech for this AI platform where user or investor could log on. They have a seed stage company they want early stage due diligence on, enter the biotech's name, and the AI scrapes the company website, the LinkedIn, the Crunchbase, any media releases, and collates it into one document or one user page for them. And they can just flick through what they need. And it's all there at a click. The C-suite's there, the media release, how much they were funded, what the science is, and what it means in particular. And so that's what I'm currently working on and looking at making a big pre-seed raise. But it's expanded from the biotech to the energy space and also the new space, because these are the 3 big startup industries, which by 2030, the biotech space is already a $4 trillion empire, I would say. But the energy space is moving towards there and the new space as well. And it's not the case of money, but it's the case of trillions of dollars. What does that look like as information? It's a lot of information. And there needs to be a way which it's broken down and communicated to these investors who are making these decisions at the early stages, but giving them all the control without having the need of having that PhD analyst where they're paying 50, 60K to do a couple of things and then work extremely hard at something else and then chop and change. They have it at their fingertips when they need it for the deal that they need to look into. Yeah, that's the exciting space. I'm also working on, we spoke about this offline, the R&D project as well, which within the next few months I'll have hopefully some more info on. But yeah, that's very cool and using my background.
Yeah. We'll stay tuned for that. Really interesting because with that description of point science analytics, we're really hearing echoes of this whole science communication superpower that you have applied to these different industries that are very complicated. As you build the company, what skills do you find are particularly transferable from the PhD training that you received?
The biggest one, as I'm discovering, is the ability to work alone without motivation. Because actually, as we know, motivation is temporary. We could have a conversation about running a 5K, run the 5K, but then a month later, we probably won't run the 5K. However, discipline is something very different. And really great podcast that I love to listen to is the Jocko podcast. And he says discipline equals freedom. And I fully buy that. Like during my PhD, or during anybody's PhD, you have to have such discipline to get up out of bed in the morning, continue after those failed experiments, after that grilling in a lab meeting, and still be on the pursuit of why. So that is the main skill, the ability to work alone, which during your PhD feels like it's one of the worst things by the end. It's a very lonely process, as they say. And then I guess there are the rest of the classical skills. We have analytical reasoning, everything along these lines. Another key one for me is the amount of information I've read through during my PhD was just absolutely key, because reading journal papers, unless it was specifically on the gene and the protein I worked on and the disease, I would be skim reading to extract information from papers. And when you're doing this for 3 or 4 years nonstop, you become very good at it. So what happens now is if I'm reading a biotech's website or working on the R&D project, I'm naturally picking out keywords and pulling them across and then going, irrelevant, wrong website, don't need to do this. And I make that filter. And that during the PhD is key, because just read as much as you can, read journal articles, read different review papers, primary, whatever they may be, read other people's slides, go over things, read is what I'd say, because your ability to extract information when you leave academia will be through the roof. Yeah.
Wonderful. So key. Not all words have equal value. Figuring out where to focus your attention is a muscle that you can really develop and get and make stronger. So cool. Now, thinking also about what you're doing currently as a startup founder, what are some of the skills and attributes that you are exercising now or manifesting now that you wish you had been exposed to and developed while you were earning your PhD, for example? Listeners may be interested in entrepreneurship, starting a company, joining a company, getting involved in the ecosystem in some way. Any recommendations for them about skills they should think about developing while they're still earning their PhD?
Yeah. So as I'm looking to raise, I'm doing costings, things like this, like how much does a CTO cost, a tech team, and along these lines. Hindsight's a great thing. And in looking back, supervisor dependent, and many current PhD students will know what I mean as well, is that get involved with when your supervisors write grants, if they allow you to. This doesn't necessarily mean you have your name on the grant, but be willing to contribute to it, ask to see how they're written, how they do their costings, even 1 hour in the month to have some of their time to go through an old grant, which is 2-3 years old, and they have the PDF version of it and they can go through it. Just because it's important to know how they articulate their idea, how they show their proof of concept or the academic version of an MVP with early stage results, what funds they're asking for, why. But then when they get a response and have to give a rebuttal to the grant writer's comments, what are they going to write? What sort of questions are asked? And it really gives you a good insight as to how to put together this sort of proposal. because it's not just a lot of technical information and cool ideas. You have to give some form of substance, like why should they buy in? And it's exact same in the entrepreneurship world. You can have a great idea, but okay, you don't have a company website. You haven't opened a company at all. Where's your product? Do you have a product? Have you made sales? Where's the tech? How much have you invested? Have you done a friends and family round? All these questions kept coming up. And these are the same sorts of things that are present in a different aspect, but in academia. So I would say get involved with your supervisors a lot more if they allow you to. Be keen and eager to contribute, to say, hey, what grant are you writing? Well, look for different grants. Where do you find grants? Look through the process, what the requirements are. Because it's not just if you wish to gain that fellowship after your PhD, that this can come in handy. Actually, in entrepreneurship as well, or in industry potentially, it allows you to think about how to structure your writing, your knowledge, your understanding, get costings involved, have substance to that. And then somebody could just say no to you. Okay, now why? You have to deal with that. You put so much effort into this document and someone's just said, no, we're not giving you 50,000 or 5 million, whatever it may be. How do you deal with that? That again, that resilience will come in during entrepreneurship.
Really interesting. Thanks for that, Ricky. When we talked offline a little bit, you used this expression that I'd like you to share with listeners, please. You talked about the difference between looking through the telescope and not just the microscope. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I realized by the end of my PhD, I know so much about one thing. I know actually very little at all about anything else. And then it reminded me of that day I was in the confocal room or even the super resolution microscope room, looking down the microscope at these neurons. And in my mind, I can see the molecular machinery working. I can see the cargo being transported up and down the axons, anything along these lines. But in entrepreneurship, you have to look through the telescope. And what I mean by that is, who is your customer, your target customer? What market are you going for? Where do you envision the product market fit? At what point? Why are you raising? There are so many different hats to wear. Ricky wears sometimes the hat of sales, where I'm cold outreaching for a couple of hours, being told no or being told, let's have a meeting. Then I have the hat of business development, where I'm trying to make and foster these relationships between people and also pull in clients as well, potential customers. And then there's the CEO hat, where it's like I'm presenting or I'm putting together this deck to present and the costings. So it's a wide spectrum of things. And when I thought about this, it was a case of during my PhD, you work with your PhD project. I worked on my PhD, and that was literally me looking through the microscope. Whereas in my department, if I looked through the telescope, that would be like a department meeting when you have several people present and you're getting an idea of different projects and what they're doing, where you have one senior professor, one master's student, one PhD, one postdoc. So there's a wide array of individuals. So it is important for me to understand that in entrepreneurship, that if I'm thinking too deeply about something, I probably veered from the telescope to the microscope, and maybe I need to switch back to the telescope to see the bigger picture. And there are times when I look at the nitty gritties of my pitch deck and the amount I'm asking for, and I go, okay, this needs to be under the microscope now. So there are instances, but broadly speaking, yeah, the telescope microscope analogy kind of keeps me grounded in terms of what am I actually doing? Am I moving the pin forwards?
Being aware of those perspectives and the need to zoom in and zoom out. I think for many of us, there isn't that awareness. We get so focused on a specific area that we miss the forest for the trees. Let me ask you, Ricky, looking at the rest of Q2 and beyond, we're right now talking at the end of April in 2023. What are your goals, professional, personal, if you would be willing to share them?
One of the key ones professionally are to get the pitch deck up and running, to get it to the point where I'm just sending it out to the right investors that I've already built relationships with, to look for the raise amount, to get raising, and then to move forwards in the latter part of the year or early next year with the big build. And then the secondary one is to work on this exciting R&D project, because it allows me to flex that intellectual muscle of research that I've missed deeply, to work with great minds to solve a cool problem and to have a lot of fun doing it. They're the two big things. And then personally, for me, it's knowing when to quit for the day, knowing when to stop, and having more self-compassion for me to know that the pin is moving forwards. It's just some days it moves forwards a lot more and some days it doesn't. And that's okay. I can be a bit more forgiving with that and enjoy being in a creative space.
Wise words from Ricky Patel. Those will be the last words of the episode. Dr. Ricky Patel, thanks so much for joining us. Your insights, your stories, your experiences, your specific actionable advice, all super valuable. Thanks for taking the time to join us on When Science Speaks.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a great pleasure speaking, and I look forward to listening to many more of your episodes.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for being along on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.